I arrived 10 minutes early to my grandson's 7th birthday, carrying a neatly wrapped Lego set, only to hear my own name replaced with something else before I even reached the cake table. "Oh, she's just a friend from the neighborhood," my daughter-in-law said with a polite smile, as if she were introducing a stranger instead of the woman who held that boy the day he was born. The words landed softly, almost gracefully, but they cut with a precision that made me stop mid-step on the edge of the Whitmore's backyard in Scottsdale, Arizona. The sun was already high, pressing down with that dry desert heat that makes plastic tablecloth stick slightly to your fingertips. Children ran through a sprinkler near the fence, their laughter rising and falling like it always did at birthday parties, while a folding table under a blue balloon arch displayed a Costco sheet cake with bright green frosting spelling out, "Happy Birthday, Ethan." I stood there for half a second longer than I should have, long enough to notice that no one corrected her. Not one person. I adjusted my grip on the gift box, smoothing the corner where the wrapping paper had folded unevenly during the drive, and then I stepped forward as if nothing had happened. Melissa," I said, my voice steady, warm, the way I had trained it over 40 years as a school librarian, greeting nervous children on their first day. She turned toward me with that same polished expression she used at church events and neighborhood fundraisers, her posture straight, her tone measured. "Eleanor, you made it," she replied, as though I'd been invited out of courtesy rather than belonging. I leaned down slightly as Ethan ran past me, his sneakers squeaking against the patio tiles. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I called, holding out the box. He slowed, glanced at me, and for a brief second his face lit up in recognition. Then his eyes flicked over my shoulder toward his mother. "Thank you, Miss Eleanor," he said carefully, almost rehearsed, before taking the gift and running back toward the other children. I remained crouched there for a moment, my hand still extended in the air where he had just been, feeling something shift quietly inside me. Not anger, not yet. Something sharper, something that paid attention. I straightened up and walked toward the drink table, where a row of red plastic cups sat beside a sweating pitcher of lemonade. A man I vaguely recognized from the neighborhood reached for a napkin and nodded politely. "Great party, right?" he said. "Melissa really knows how to host." "She always has," I replied, pouring myself a small glass. The ice cubes clinked against the plastic, a small, ordinary sound that grounded me more than anything else in that moment. I took a sip and let my eyes move across the yard. Not aimlessly, but carefully. I noticed the guest list clipboard resting near the gift table, the neat columns of names written in Melissa's handwriting. I stepped closer under the pretense of placing my gift down, scanning the list once, then again. Families, neighbors, coworkers. Every name accounted for. Every connection clearly labeled. Except mine. I was not there. Not crossed out. Not misspelled. Simply absent, as if I had never been expected at all. Behind me, I heard Melissa's voice again, light and controlled. "Daniel, can you make sure the photographer gets all the family shots before the cake melts?" she said. "Family shots." I turned slightly, just enough to see my son standing near the grill, flipping burgers with a pair of metal tongs. He nodded without looking up. "Yeah, of course," he replied. "Of course." I watched him for a moment longer than I should have, waiting for something, a glance, a hesitation, any sign that what had just happened mattered. But he moved on to the next task just like that. I placed my hand lightly on the edge of the table, feeling the thin plastic covering shift beneath my fingers, and allowed myself one quiet question, not spoken aloud, but clear as anything I had ever known. When did my place in this family become something that could be erased so easily? And who decided it should be? I stayed near the edge of the yard just long enough to see how the rest of the afternoon would unfold, and it did not take long for the next piece to fall into place. "Okay, everyone, let us gather for family photos before the cake," the photographer called out, lifting a professional camera with a long lens and gesturing toward the balloon arch. Melissa moved quickly, her voice calm but precise. "Immediate family first," she said, clapping her hands lightly as if organizing a classroom. Daniel stepped over from the grill, wiping his hands on a paper towel, and Ethan ran toward him, laughing. I watched them take their places, Melissa smoothing Ethan's shirt Daniel resting a hand on his shoulder, and then the photographer looked around. "Anyone else joining the family shot?" he asked. For a brief second, no one answered. Melissa smiled and shook her head, just slightly. "No, that is everyone," she said. I felt the words settle into the space between us, clear and deliberate. Not rushed, not accidental. I took a step forward anyway, not enough to interrupt, just enough to exist in the frame of possibility. The photographer hesitated, his eyes flicking toward me. "Ma'am, would you like to—" "She is with the neighbors," Melissa cut in smoothly, already turning her body back toward the camera. "We will grab some group shots later." The photographer nodded, adjusting his lens. "All right, everyone look right here." The shutter clicked several times in quick succession, the sound sharp and final. I stood still, holding my lemonade, feeling the condensation slide slowly down the side of the cup and onto my fingers. A woman standing beside me, blonde, maybe in her early 50s, leaned in slightly. "I thought you might be Ethan's grandma," she said quietly, her tone more curious than intrusive. I met her eyes and gave a small, measured smile. "I am," I replied. She blinked, just once, and glanced toward Melissa before lowering her voice even further. "Oh, that is not what I was told." I nodded as if that confirmed something simple, something already understood. "It seems there are a few things not being said clearly today," I said. She straightened, offering a polite nod before stepping away, leaving me alone again with my thoughts. Across the yard, the photographer was now directing a second round of pictures. "Let us get one with extended friends," he said. This time, Melissa waved her hand in a broader circle. "Anyone can join this one," she called out. The invitation was open, casual, and somehow more distancing than exclusion. I stepped forward with the others, positioning myself near the edge of the group. As we settled into place, I noticed something small but precise. Melissa adjusted the spacing so that I stood 2 people away from Ethan, with another guest gently guided between us. "Perfect," the photographer said. Everyone squeezed in a little. I did not move. I let the space remain exactly as she had arranged it. After the photos, I walked toward the gift table again, my eyes drawn back to that clipboard. This time, I picked it up. No one stopped me. The paper was thick, printed from a home office printer, with neat rows labeled name, relationship, and RSVP. I traced my finger down the list slowly. Whitmore family, neighbors, co-workers, friends. Under relationship, each person had been categorized with care. Aunt, uncle, family friend. Next to my son's name, father. Next to Melissa, mother. Next to Ethan, birthday boy. My name was not there, not mislabeled, not hidden under a different category. It had never been written at all. I set the clipboard back down exactly where it had been and turned just in time to see Daniel walking toward me. For a moment, I thought perhaps he had noticed something, that he might say something to bridge the distance that had quietly opened between us. Instead, he stopped a few feet away, glancing briefly at the table before meeting my eyes. "Hey," he said, his voice casual, almost distracted. "You doing okay?" I studied his face, looking for anything beneath the surface, concern, discomfort, even a hint of conflict. "I am," I answered. "I was just looking at how organized everything is." He gave a short nod. "Yeah, Melissa handled most of it. She likes things a certain way." "A certain way." I'll let the phrase settle. "It is very thorough," I said. "Every detail seems intentional." He shifted his weight slightly, his gaze drifting past me toward the guests gathering near the cake. "Well, it just keeps things simple," he replied. "Less confusion that way." I held his gaze a moment longer than he seemed comfortable with, then offered a small, polite smile. "Simple for whom?" I asked quietly. He did not answer right away. Instead, he looked over his shoulder, as if checking whether someone was watching, and then gave a faint shrug. "It is just a party, Mom," he said, lowering his voice. "Do not overthink it. Just a party." I nodded once, letting the conversation end there, at least on the surface. But as he walked away, I felt something shift again. Not the same sharpness as before, but something steadier, more focused. Because this was no longer about a single introduction or a misplaced label. There was a pattern here. structured and maintained with care, and for the first time, I realized I was not the only one who had noticed it. The question was no longer whether this had been done on purpose. The question was how long it had been happening, and how many people had been told to play along. I did not move right away after Daniel walked off. Instead, I picked up my phone from my purse and stepped a few feet toward the shade of a tall Palo Verde tree at the edge of the yard, where the hum of conversation softened just enough for me to think clearly. The music had shifted to something upbeat, children's songs layered over a portable speaker, and the smell of grilled burgers drifted through the air. On the surface, everything looked exactly the way a family celebration should. That was what made it so precise. I opened the Facebook app, something I rarely used except to see photos of Ethan, and typed Melissa's name into the search bar. Her profile came up instantly, curated the way she curated everything else, clean, polished, controlled. I tapped on her photos and began scrolling, slowly at first, then with more intention. Thanksgiving last year. Christmas morning. Ethan's kindergarten graduation. Each image carefully framed, warmly lit, full of smiling faces. I leaned slightly against the tree, narrowing my eyes as I studied them more closely. In one photo, I saw Daniel and Melissa standing beside Ethan in matching holiday sweaters. In another, Ethan sat on Santa's lap, Melissa crouched beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. There were cousins, neighbors, even a coworker I had met once at a church fundraiser. But there was a consistent absence that no caption acknowledged. Me, not in the background, not partially cropped, not even by accident. I felt something settle into place, not as a sudden realization, but as a pattern completing itself. You looking for something specific? A voice asked beside me. I glanced up to see a young woman, early 20s, maybe, holding a tray of juice boxes. She wore a simple white shirt and jeans, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. I recognized her vaguely as someone who had been setting up decorations earlier. Just catching up on photos, I said, tilting the phone slightly. She nodded, then hesitated, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. Ms. Whitmore, right? She asked. I smiled faintly. Eleanor is fine. She gave a small, nervous laugh. Melissa told me to call you that, she said, then paused as if she had said more than she intended. I lowered the phone slowly, giving her my full attention. Told you to call me Eleanor? I repeated. She nodded quickly. Yeah, just to keep things consistent, she said. She said it would be less confusing for the kids and the guests. Less confusing. I studied her face for a moment, noticing the way her eyes flicked toward the house, as if checking whether someone might be watching. And what would be confusing? I asked gently. She hesitated again, gripping the tray a little tighter. I do not know exactly, she admitted. She just said not to use, family titles unless she introduces it that way. I held her gaze, not pressing, just allowing the silence to stretch long enough for the meaning to settle. Thank you, I said finally. That is helpful. She nodded once, relieved, and quickly moved back toward the other guests. I looked down at my phone again, but I was no longer searching for photos. I was tracing decisions. Each post, each caption, each carefully chosen angle had not just excluded me. It had rewritten the story of this family in a way that removed me entirely. And it had not happened overnight. I slipped my phone back in my purse and straightened, my posture shifting almost without conscious effort. Across the yard, Ethan was sitting at a small plastic table, struggling to open the box I had given him. I walked over, pulling out a chair beside him. Need a little help there? I asked, my tone light. He looked up, his face brightening again, this time without hesitation. Yeah, I cannot get this part, he said, handing me the edge of the tape. I peeled it back carefully, the paper giving way with a soft rip, and lifted the lid. Inside, the Lego set was exactly what I had chosen, something he had pointed out weeks ago in a store window. Whoa, he said, his eyes widening. This is the one I wanted. I smiled. I remember, I said. He looked at me for a moment, then leaned slightly closer. Are you staying for cake? He asked quietly. I met his gaze, noting the softness in his voice, the way he lowered it just enough that it would not carry. I am, I said, if that is all right with you. He nodded quickly. It is, he said, then added after a brief pause. Mom said we have to call people what she tells us, so it does not get mixed up. I kept my hand steady on the box, even as that sentence settled more deeply than anything else I had heard that afternoon. And what did she tell you to call me? I asked just as gently. He looked down at the Lego pieces, turning one over in his fingers. Just Eleanor, he said. I nodded once, slowly, as if that answer required no further explanation. I see, I replied. From across the yard, Melissa's voice carried clearly. Ethan, cake time, she called. He jumped up immediately, clutching the box, and ran toward the table. I remained seated for a moment longer, watching him go, then stood and smoothed the front of my blouse. The picture was no longer incomplete. It was deliberate, structured, and taught, down to the words a 7-year-old was allowed to use. And as I walked toward the cake table, I realized there was one piece I had not yet seen clearly. What exactly Melissa was trying to replace me with, and why it mattered enough for her to control every single detail. Melissa's voice carried over the chatter as I approached the cake table, smooth and practiced. Okay, everyone gather around. Let us make this quick before the frosting melts. The photographer repositioned himself, adjusting the tripod this time, which told me these were not just casual snapshots. These were the pictures that would be kept, printed, shared. I slowed my steps, watching carefully as people arranged themselves again. Ethan stood in the center, hands already hovering near the candles, while Daniel moved to his left. Melissa took her place on the right, one hand resting lightly on Ethan's shoulder, guiding him into position. Then she turned slightly, scanning the group. Just immediate family for this one, she said, her tone gentle but final. No one questioned it. I stepped forward anyway, closing the distance by a few feet, enough to be seen without interrupting. The photographer glanced at me again, uncertain. Ma'am, if you are family, we are good, Melissa said quickly, her smile still in place but her eyes sharper now. We have everyone. We need. The phrasing was different this time. Not that is everyone. We have everyone we need. I stopped where I was, letting the distinction settle. The candles were lit, their small flames flickering in the dry air. Ready, the photographer called. On 3. As the count began, I shifted my gaze slightly to the side of the table, where a small acrylic sign had been placed among the decorations. It was styled like something from a boutique party shop, clean white lettering on clear plastic, propped up beside the cake stand. Whitmore Family Celebration, it read at the top. Beneath that, in smaller script, was a list of names. Melissa, Daniel, Ethan. The order was deliberate, almost formal. There was no space left at the bottom. No missing line. No indication that anything had been removed. Just a complete, self-contained unit. I stepped closer, as if drawn by curiosity alone, and reached out to steady the sign where the breeze had tilted it slightly. The base was weighted, intentional, not something placed casually. This had been printed, designed, ordered ahead of time. Everything all right over there. Daniel's voice came from behind me, quieter now, edged with something that was not quite concern. I turned, keeping my hand lightly on the edge of the table. It is, I said. I was just reading. His eyes flicked to the sign, then back to me. Melissa put that together, he said. She wanted it to look cohesive. I held his gaze for a moment. It does, I replied. Very clear. The photographer lowered his camera briefly. Actually, I usually get one with grandparents too, he said, almost apologetically. It is a nice touch for the album. For a second, there was a pause, small but noticeable. Melissa laughed softly, the kind of laugh that smooths over edges. Oh, that will not be necessary, she said. We are keeping it simple today. Keeping it simple. The same phrase Daniel had used earlier. I felt the repetition click into place, like a phrase rehearsed until it sounded natural. The photographer nodded, though his expression suggested he understood more than he was saying. All right, he said, lifting the camera again. Let's go ahead. The candles were blown out. Applause followed, and the moment moved forward as if nothing had shifted. But something had. I stepped back from the table, my attention returning to that sign, to the names etched into it with such quiet certainty. This was not just about what had been said out loud. It It was about what had been prepared in advance, what had been printed, arranged, and reinforced before a single guest arrived. I moved away from the crowd, circling toward the side of the house where a small stack of party supplies sat near the sliding glass door. There, partially tucked beneath a cardboard box, I noticed a second acrylic piece, identical in size but turned face down. I bent slightly and lifted it, just enough to see the reflection of the lettering in reverse through the plastic. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, for the words to resolve themselves backward. Then I saw clearly. The same title, the same names, and beneath them, faint but unmistakable, a fourth line that had been removed from the final version. Eleanor. The edge of the engraving had been sanded down, the surface smoothed where the name had once been. Not crossed out, not replaced, erased. I lowered the piece slowly, placing it back exactly where I found it. Behind me, laughter rose again as slices of cake were handed out on white paper plates. I straightened, brushing my hands lightly together, and turned back toward the party. Because now I was no longer asking whether I had been excluded. I was looking at proof that I had been deliberately removed. And the only question left was how far Melissa had gone to make sure no one ever questioned why. I placed the acrylic piece back exactly where I'd found it and walked toward the side gate, needing a moment where no one was watching closely. The hum of conversation behind me had shifted again, softer now as people settled into small groups with paper plates and plastic forks. I could hear Ethan laughing somewhere near the patio table, his voice rising above the rest, light and unaffected. That, more than anything, steadied me. I reached for my purse and pulled out my car keys, not because I intended to leave, but because I needed something solid in my hand, something that belonged to me without question. Before I could take another step, Melissa's voice came from behind me, closer than I expected. Eleanor, can I talk to you for a second? I turned, meeting her, halfway between the house and the fence. Up close, her expression had changed. The smile was still there, but it no longer reached her eyes. Of course, I said. She gestured lightly toward the side of the house, away from the guests. Just over here. We walked a few feet until the noise of the party dulled into the background. She folded her arms loosely, her posture relaxed, but there was nothing casual about the way she held my gaze. I noticed you looking at the setup earlier, she began. The sign, the guest list, all of that. I nodded once. You have put a lot of thought into it. I have, she replied, because things can get complicated when roles are not clearly defined. There was again. Clear, simple, defined. I let her continue. Ethan is at an age where consistency matters, she said. We are trying to create a stable environment for him. That means keeping certain boundaries in place, especially in social settings. I watched her carefully, noting the precision of each word. Boundaries, I repeated, that include what he is allowed to call me. She did not hesitate. Yes, she said, it is easier for him this way. I tilted my head slightly, studying her. Easier, I said quietly. Or more convenient? Her smile tightened just a fraction. I think you understand what I'm trying to do, she replied. This is not about excluding you. It is about presenting a clear picture of our family unit. I let that sentence settle between us, then asked the question that mattered. And I'm not part of that picture. She paused just briefly, and in that pause I saw the truth before she spoke it. Not in the way you used to be, she said. The words were calm, almost gentle, but they carried weight. I felt something shift again, not breaking this time, but aligning. That is a decision you have made, I said. It is a decision we have made, she corrected, her tone still even. Daniel agrees that this is what is best moving forward. I glanced past her for a moment, catching sight of my son near the patio, laughing with a group of guests as if nothing in the world required his attention. Then I looked back at her. Does he? I said. She took a small step closer, lowering her voice. Eleanor, I am trying to handle this respectfully, she said. But I need you to work with me here. No corrections, no public conversations that might confuse people. Just go along with it for today. I considered her words carefully, not reacting right away. And if I do not? I asked. Her expression did not change, but something in her eyes sharpened. Then I will have to ask you to leave, she said. I do not want to do that, but I will if it becomes necessary. The statement hung in the air between us, quiet and absolute. I nodded slowly, absorbing not just the words, but the certainty behind them. I appreciate your honesty, I said. She seemed to relax slightly, as if she had expected resistance and was relieved not to find it. Thank you, she replied. I knew you would understand. I gave her a small, polite smile. Oh, I understand perfectly, I said. She turned back toward the party, her posture returning to its composed, hosting rhythm, already moving on to the next task. I remained where I was for a moment longer, my hand still loosely holding my car keys. The stakes had just changed. This was no longer subtle. It was defined, enforced, and backed by my son's silence. I slipped the keys back into my purse and walked toward the house, not the yard. Because if Melissa had decided I did not belong in the picture she was presenting today, then the next thing I needed to find out was how far that decision extended beyond this party, and what else had already been put in place without me knowing. I did not return to the yard right away. Instead, I stepped through the sliding glass door into the kitchen, where the air conditioning hummed softly and the noise from outside became a distant blur. The contrast was immediate, cool, quiet, controlled. A granite island sat in the center, spotless except for a tray of unopened soda cans and a stack of white paper napkins folded into neat triangles. Everything inside the house carried the same signature as the party outside. Intentional, curated, precise. I set my purse down on the counter and took a slow breath, letting my reflection in the dark microwave door settle into focus. I did not look shaken. I looked clear. That was new. Voices drifted in from the hallway, low enough that I could not make out words, only tone. I moved toward the sound, not hiding, just walking with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged in every room of this house. The hallway led past Daniel's office, the door slightly ajar. Inside, a desk lamp was on, casting a warm circle of light over a spread of papers. I paused at the doorway, not out of hesitation, but because something on that desk caught my attention immediately. A folder, cream-colored, with a tab labeled in black ink. Estate planning, Whitmore. I stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of leather and printer toner, a combination I recognized from years of handling school records. The desk itself was too orderly to be accidental. Documents aligned, a pen placed parallel to the edge, a legal pad with notes written in Daniel's careful handwriting. I reached for the folder and opened it just enough to see the top page. Trust structure overview. Beneficiaries listed in clear, formal language. Daniel Whitmore. Melissa Whitmore. Ethan Whitmore. My name was not there. I let the page fall back into place, my fingers resting lightly on the edge of the folder. This was not about a party. This was not about a name tag or a photograph. This was a transition, documented and formalized, already in motion. Mom! Daniel's voice came from behind me, closer than I expected. I turned, meeting him without surprise. He stood in the doorway, his expression tightening slightly as his eyes flicked from me to the desk. "What are you doing in here?" he asked. His tone was not angry, but it was guarded. I closed the folder gently, aligning it exactly as I'd found it. "I came in to get a little quiet," I said. "It is warm out there." He stepped into the room, crossing his arms loosely. "You should probably stay with the guests," he said. "Melissa has everything set up outside." I studied him for a moment, then nodded toward the desk. "You have been busy," I said. His gaze followed mine, then returned quickly. "Just some paperwork," he replied. "Nothing you need to worry about." I held his eyes, not challenging, just steady. "That depends on what it is," I said. He shifted his weight, a small movement, but enough to tell me I had touched something real. "Mom," he said, lowering his voice, "we are trying to simplify things. Make sure everything is clear for the future. That is all. Simplify. Clear." The same language, repeated again, now anchored in something tangible. "And where do I fit into that clarity?" I asked. He hesitated, just long enough to confirm what I already knew. "You will be taken care of," he said finally. "That has not changed." I nodded slowly, letting the phrase settle. "Taken care of. Not included. Not named. Managed." "I see," I said. He seemed relieved that I did not push further, stepping back toward the hallway. Come on, he added, gesturing toward the door. Cake is almost done. I followed him out, but not because I needed direction. As we stepped back into the brightness of the backyard, I glanced once more over my shoulder at the office door, now closing softly behind us. The folder, the names, the structure, it was all part of the same design. And for the first time since I arrived, I felt something shift fully into place. Not confusion, not even hurt, strategy. Because if they had already rewritten the future without me, then the next move was no longer about proving who I was. It was about deciding what I would do with what I now knew, and when I would choose to reveal it. I stepped back into the rhythm of the party as if nothing had shifted, accepting a small paper plate with a slice of cake from one of the guests, and moving toward a shaded spot near the patio. The frosting was too sweet, the kind that leaves a thin film on your tongue, but I took a bite anyway, letting the normalcy of the moment settle around me. Children were laughing again, a few parents were discussing school schedules for the fall, and Melissa moved through the crowd with quiet efficiency, adjusting, correcting, guiding. It was all working exactly as she intended, which meant it could be disrupted just as precisely. I set my plate down on the edge of a nearby table and picked up a napkin, dabbing my fingers lightly. Then I turned and walked toward a small group of guests gathered near the drink station, including the blonde woman who had spoken to me earlier and a man in a golf shirt I recognized from the neighborhood association. "Excuse me," I said, stepping into their circle. With a polite smile, I did not think we had been properly introduced. The man straightened slightly, offering his hand. "Mark Henderson," he said. "We live 2 houses down." I shook his hand firmly. "Eleanor Whitmore," I replied, holding his gaze just long enough. "Ethan's grandmother." There was a brief pause, not dramatic but unmistakable. The blonde woman glanced between us, her expression shifting as she recalibrated what she had been told. "Oh," she said quietly, "that makes more sense." I smiled, not warmly, but clearly. "It usually does," I said. Mark nodded, his tone easy but now more attentive. "Well, it is nice to finally meet you," he said. "Ethan talks about his grandma all the time. I just assumed." He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. "Assumptions are often based on the information people are given," I replied. "And sometimes that information is selective." I let the word settle, then shifted my attention slightly, allowing the conversation to breathe without pressing it further. Behind me, I could feel rather than see the change. Conversation slowed, eyes turned, small pieces of awareness moving through the group like a quiet ripple. Not loud, not confrontational, but present. I picked up my plate again, taking another small bite of cake as if nothing of consequence had just happened. A few minutes later, I heard Melissa's voice again, closer this time. "Eleanor," she said, her tone still composed, but with a new edge beneath it. I turned to face her, meeting her gaze directly. "Yes." She stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough that it would not carry far, but not so much that it looked secretive. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" she asked. "Of course," I replied. We moved a few steps away, though this time she did not take me fully out of sight of the others. That in itself was a shift. She wanted this contained, but visible enough to maintain control. "I thought we agreed to keep things simple today," she said. "We did," I answered calmly. "And I have." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Then why are you correcting people?" she asked. I held her gaze, steady and unhurried. "I introduced myself," I said. "That is not a correction. That is a fact." She exhaled slowly, her composure tightening. "You are making this harder than it needs to be," she said. "For whom?" I asked. The question landed more directly this time. She did not answer immediately, and in that hesitation, I saw something new. Not uncertainty, but calculation adjusting to a variable she had not fully accounted for. "Eleanor," she said finally, her tone softening just slightly, "this is not the place for this conversation." "You are right," I said. "It is not." I let that agreement sit between us, then added, "But it is the place where your version of things is being presented." Her expression stilled. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, from across the yard, Mark's voice carried lightly. "Hey, Daniel," he called. "You never mentioned your mom lives nearby." I did not turn to look. I did not need to. I could feel the shift in the air, the subtle change in how the story was being received. Melissa's gaze followed the sound, just for a second, and when she looked back at me, something had changed. Not lost control. Not yet, but adjusted. We will talk about this later, she said quietly. I nodded once. I would like that, I replied. She stepped away then, returning to the center of the party, her movements still smooth, still practiced, but now carrying a fraction more intention than before. I remained where I was, picking up my glass of lemonade and taking a slow sip, my eyes moving across the yard with a different kind of clarity. The balance had shifted, not enough to break anything, but enough to be noticed. And as I watched Daniel turn toward Mark, his expression tightening just slightly as the question reached him, I understood something important. Melissa had built her version of this family carefully, but she had built it on the assumption that I would remain silent. And now that assumption was no longer holding. The only question left was how far she was willing to go to restore control, and what she might do next to make sure I did not speak again. I stayed exactly where I was as the conversation shifted around me, but I could feel the subtle tightening of the atmosphere, like a room where someone had just opened a window and let in colder air. Melissa moved faster now, her steps more deliberate as she crossed the yard and placed a hand lightly on Daniel's arm, guiding him a few feet away from Mark. They spoke in low voices, but I did not need to hear the words to understand the intention. Control was being reasserted. Within minutes, the rhythm of the party adjusted again. Melissa clapped her hands softly, drawing attention without raising her voice. All right, everyone, she said, smiling as she stepped toward the center. Before we wrap up, I want to thank you all for coming. It means a lot to us to have our close circle here today. Close circle. The phrase landed differently now. She gestured toward the photographer again. We're going to do one last round of photos, just to capture the day properly. The photographer nodded, lifting his camera. Let us get a few candid group shots, he said. Everyone can just relax and stand wherever you feel comfortable. Melissa laughed lightly. Actually, she said, I would love to organize this one a bit more. She turned, scanning the group with practiced ease. Family right here, she said, guiding Daniel and Ethan back into position. Then she pointed gently toward a cluster of guests near the drink table. Friends over here, please. That way we keep it balanced. I watched as people shifted, following her instructions without question. The separation was subtle, almost polite, but it was unmistakable. I remained where I was, neither stepping forward nor back, simply observing how the space was being divided. The blonde woman hesitated near me, glancing between the two groups. What do you want me? She asked uncertainly. Melissa answered before I could. Over here with the neighbors, she said, gesturing toward the outer group. Then, after a brief pause, she added, Eleanor, you can join them. The phrasing was careful, not a command, not a dismissal, a placement. I met her gaze, holding it for a moment longer than she seemed to expect. Of course, I said, my tone even, and stepped into the group she had indicated. The photographer adjusted his stance, framing the shot. All right, everyone, just relax, he said. Let us get a natural moment. As he raised the camera, I shifted slightly, not enough to disrupt the arrangement, but enough to see clearly across the space Melissa had created. Daniel stood with his hand resting on Ethan's shoulder, his posture composed, but his eyes moving more than before. He glanced once toward me, then away quickly, as if the act of looking required too much explanation. Perfect, the photographer said. The shutter clicked. Again, each sound marking a version of the day that would be preserved, shared, remembered, or rewritten. When the photos were done, Melissa stepped forward again, her smile returning to its polished form. Thank you, everyone, she said. That was exactly what I wanted. She turned slightly toward me then, her expression softening just enough to appear gracious. Eleanor, she added, I appreciate you working with me today. It really helps keep things smooth. I nodded once. I can see that, I replied. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she tilted her head slightly, as if considering something, and lowered her voice just enough to feel private. There are some things you may not be aware of yet, she said. It is better if we handle them carefully. I studied her face, noting the confidence that had settled there now, more visible than before. I'm sure there are, I said. She held my gaze a moment longer, then gave a small, satisfied nod and turned away, already calling out to someone about leftover food and take-home containers. The party began to wind down. Guests gathered their belongings. Children compared party favors, and the sun dipped just enough to cast longer shadows across the yard. I picked up my purse from the patio chair and slipped a strap over my shoulder, my movements unhurried. As I did, I noticed something new, a stack of white envelopes arranged neatly near the sliding glass door, partially tucked beneath a decorative tray. They had not been there earlier, or if they had not been meant to be seen yet. I stepped closer, just enough to read the top one without touching it. The envelope was addressed in Melissa's handwriting. Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Whitmore. Inside, I could see the edge of a printed document, thick paper, formal. Not a thank you card, not a casual note. Something official, something prepared. I straightened slowly, letting my eyes move back toward Melissa, who was now laughing with a small group near the fence, entirely at ease again. She had moved forward with her plan, more confidently than before, as if my earlier shift had only prompted her to accelerate. That told me something important. Whatever she had set in motion, it was not limited to this afternoon. And as I turned toward the driveway, the envelope still clear in my mind, I realized that the next step would not come from what she said in public, but from what she was preparing behind closed doors. I did not reach for the envelope. Not yet. Instead, I adjusted the strap of my purse and walked past the sliding door as if I had not noticed anything at all, letting the moment pass in plain sight. Outside, the party had begun to dissolve into smaller goodbyes. Car doors opening, children being called over, leftover cake wrapped in foil and tucked into grocery bags. Melissa stood near the driveway now, handing out neatly packed containers, her smile returning to something softer, almost generous. It was a performance that had already moved on from tension to resolution. That told me everything I needed to know. Whatever had been prepared inside that house was not meant to be questioned today. It was meant to be accepted later. I stepped toward my car, but did not open the door. Instead, I turned back, scanning the yard one more time, letting my eyes settle on the details I had not yet examined closely enough. Near the patio table, a small stack of party favors sat in a woven basket, bright paper bags tied with ribbon, each labeled with a child's name. I walked over and picked one up, not out of curiosity, but out of habit. Years of working with children had taught me that what adults overlooked, children carried home. Inside the bag were small toys, a juice box, and a folded card. I opened it carefully. Thank you for celebrating with us. It read in clean, printed script. Beneath that, in smaller text, the Whitmore family. Again, the same phrasing, the same closed circle. I set the bag back exactly as I found it and turned just as Daniel approached me, his keys already in his hand. You heading out? He asked. I studied him for a moment, noting the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his voice carried a hint of expectation rather than curiosity. In a minute, I said. I wanted to say goodbye properly. He nodded, though his eyes flicked briefly toward the house. That is good, he said. Mom, he added after a pause, about earlier, it is just easier if we keep things consistent, okay? There was again. Easier. Consistent. I held his gaze, not arguing, not correcting. I understand what you were asking, I said. He seemed to relax at that, just slightly. Good, he replied. It will make things smoother going forward. Going forward. I nodded once. Yes, I said. It will. I walked past him then, back toward the house, my steps unhurried. Inside, the kitchen was quieter now, most of the supplies already cleared away. The tray of envelopes was still there, untouched, as if waiting for a moment that had not yet arrived. I moved closer this time, close enough to see the fine print through the edge of the paper. Legal formatting, structured paragraphs, signatures at the bottom, faintly visible through the envelope. I reached out and lifted the top one, just slightly, enough to feel the weight of it in my hand. Thick paper, multiple pages, not a draft, not a casual note. Something finalized. Those are going out next week, Melissa's voice said from behind me. I did not turn right away. Are they? I asked, my tone neutral. She stepped into the kitchen, her reflection appearing beside mine in the glass of the microwave door. Yes, she said. It is just part of getting everything organized. I lowered the envelope back into place, aligning it carefully with the others. You have been very thorough, I said. That is the idea, she replied. There was no hesitation in her voice now. No need to soften the edges. It avoids confusion later. I turned in, meeting her gaze directly. I'm sure it does, I said. For a moment, we stood there in silence, the distance between us measured not in steps, but in decisions already made. Then I gave a small nod and walked past her, back toward the front door. I did not ask what was inside the envelopes. I did not need to. I had already seen enough to understand their purpose. And more importantly, I had seen enough to know exactly what needed to happen next. As I stepped outside and walked toward my car, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the driveway, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. This time, I did not open social media. I scrolled to a different contact, one I had not needed in years, and pressed call. The line rang once, twice. Then a familiar voice answered. This is Martin Reynolds, he said. I allowed myself a small, steady breath before speaking. Martin, I said, this is Eleanor Whitmore. I believe it is time we reviewed my documents and made a few changes of our own. I did not wait until I got home to continue that call. I sat in my car with the engine off, the heat of the steering wheel still holding the afternoon sun, and listened as Martin's voice settled into a familiar rhythm on the other end of the line. Eleanor, he said, his tone warm but immediately attentive. It has been a while. What can I do for you? I watched through the windshield as Daniel carried a folding chair back toward the garage, his movements efficient, routine, as if nothing of consequence had taken place. I need to review everything, I said. My will, the trust, any documentation connected to my estate. There was a brief pause, not hesitation, but calculation. Of course, Martin replied. Is there something specific that prompted this? I considered the question for a moment, then answered with precision. Yes, I said. I have reason to believe that decisions are being made under the assumption that I will not challenge them. Another pause, slightly longer this time. I see, he said. Well, I can tell you this. Nothing changes unless you authorize it. Whatever you signed previously remains in effect until you decide otherwise. I nodded, even though he could not see me. Good, I said, because I intend to make changes. Significant ones. His tone shifted, sharpening just slightly. Then we should meet in person, he said. Tomorrow, if possible. Bring any documents you currently have. I will prepare everything else. I glanced back toward the house, where Melissa now stood near the doorway, speaking to a couple who were just leaving. She looked composed, confident, entirely certain of the structure she had put in place. Tomorrow works, I said. 10 o'clock. 10 is perfect, Martin replied. And Eleanor, he added, if there is anything urgent, anything you think might already be in motion, you should bring that up immediately when we meet. I allowed myself a small, steady breath. I will, I said. I ended the call and sat there for a moment longer, not reflecting, not hesitating, just aligning the next steps. Then I opened the car door and stepped back into the driveway. Melissa noticed me right away, her attention shifting with the same awareness she had shown all afternoon. You are leaving? She asked, her tone light, almost casual. I am, I said. I do not want to slip out without saying goodbye. She smiled, stepping closer. We appreciate you coming, she said. It meant a lot to Ethan. I nodded. He enjoyed his gift, I replied. He always had a good eye for those sets. Her smile held, but her eyes searched mine briefly, as if measuring whether something had changed. We will be sending out some updates soon, she said, her voice lowering just enough to suggest importance. About a few things moving forward. There was again, not hidden, not rushed, presented as a natural progression. I saw that, I said, meeting her gaze directly. You have been very organized. She gave a small nod, clearly pleased. It keeps things clean, she said. Everyone knows where they stand. I let that sentence settle, then offered a slight smile of my own. That is important, I said. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel stepped out from the garage, keys in hand, his attention shifting between us. Mom, do you need help with anything? He asked. I shook my head. No, I said. I have everything I need. He nodded, though something in his expression suggested he was trying to read more into that statement than I had given him. All right, he said. Drive safe. I will, I replied. I turned then, walking toward my car without looking back. The door closed with a soft, final sound, and this time I started the engine. As I pulled out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse of the house in the rearview mirror, balloons still tied to the fence, the banner shifting slightly in the breeze, the scene already settling into memory. But what stayed with me was not the image. It was the structure behind it. The documents, the names, the assumptions. By the time I reached the end of the street, my next move was no longer forming. It was set, because tomorrow morning, those documents would not just be reviewed. They would be rewritten. And when that happened, the version of the family Melissa had so carefully constructed would be forced to face something she had not accounted for. What it meant when the person she erased was the one who still controlled the outcome. I arrived at Martin Reynolds' office the next morning at exactly 9:55 a.m., 5 minutes early, the way I had always done for appointments that mattered. The building sat just off Camelback Road, a low, modern structure with reflective glass and a quiet lobby that smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh coffee. Inside, everything felt measured and deliberate, a contrast to the carefully staged chaos of the day before. Martin greeted me himself, stepping out from behind a glass door with a folder already in hand. Eleanor, he said, offering a firm handshake. Come in. I have been reviewing your file since early this morning. I followed him into his office, taking a seat across from his desk as he set the folder down between us. It was thicker than I expected. That alone told me something had already shifted. Before we begin, he said, adjusting his glasses, I need to confirm something. Has anyone approached you recently about changes to your estate or presented documents for you to sign? I met his gaze directly. No one has asked me to sign anything, I said, but I saw documents in my son's home. Structured, prepared. My name was not included. Martin nodded slowly, as if that confirmed a suspicion rather than surprised him. He opened the folder and turned it toward me, revealing a series of printed pages marked with tabs. Then you need to see this, he said. He flipped to the first section. These are public filings and preliminary drafts that were submitted by a third-party firm last week, he explained. They are not finalized, but they indicate intent. I leaned forward slightly, scanning the page. Whitmore Family Trust, Amendment Proposal. The language was formal, precise, and unmistakable. Beneficiary restructuring. Asset consolidation. Transfer of primary control to Daniel Whitmore and Melissa Whitmore. I read further, my eyes moving steadily down the page until they reached a section labeled Contingent Provisions. There, in clear, unambiguous terms, was a clause I had not expected. In the event that Eleanor Whitmore is deemed non-contributing or absent from the defined family unit, her standing as primary beneficiary may be reevaluated and reassigned. I sat back slowly, letting the words settle. Not removed, reclassified, defined out of existence. They cannot enforce this without your consent, Martin said, his voice calm but firm. But the language is strategic. It creates a narrative, one that could be used to justify pressure or even challenge your current standing if left unaddressed. I nodded once, my mind already aligning the pieces. The party, the introductions, the photographs, the documents. They're building a case, I said quietly. Martin met my eyes. Yes, he replied, and they have started earlier than you realized. He turned another page, sliding it closer to me. This is where it becomes more important, he added. I looked down. Attached to the amendment draft was a supporting document, an internal memo from the same firm. It outlined a timeline, social integration adjustments, public perception alignment, consistent language usage in family settings. My fingers rested lightly on the edge of the paper as I read the final line. Gradual transition recommended to avoid confrontation and ensure compliance. I allowed myself a small breath, not out of shock but recognition. That explains the party, I said. And the language, Martin added. And the documentation you saw in your son's home. He closed the folder gently, his expression steady. Eleanor, this is not just preparation. This is coordination. And if you do nothing, it will continue. I held his gaze, my posture straight, my voice clear. Then we will not do nothing, I said. He nodded once, as if that was the only answer he had expected. Good, he replied, because there is something else you should know. He reached into the folder again and pulled out a separate document, placing it carefully in front of me. Your original trust, he said, tapping the page lightly. The one your late husband helped structure. It contains a clause they have either overlooked or chosen to ignore. I looked down, my eyes scanning the familiar language until they found the section he indicated. A single paragraph buried beneath standard provisions, but written with unmistakable clarity. Any attempt to alter beneficiary designation based on subjective definitions of family status would immediately trigger a full review by the original trustee, Martin Reynolds himself, with authority to suspend all pending amendments. I felt the shift immediately. Not emotional, structural. So if they proceed with this narrative, I said slowly, they activate a review they cannot control. Martin gave a small, precise nod. Exactly, he said. I leaned back in my chair, my hands resting calmly in my lap, the pieces now fully aligned. They had built their plan carefully. They had anticipated silence. They had prepared for compliance. But they had not accounted for the one mechanism that could stop everything the moment it was used. Then the question is not whether we respond, I said. It is when. Martin's expression sharpened just slightly. Timing will be everything, he replied. I nodded once, my decision already settling into place. Because now, for the first time since I stepped into that backyard, I was no longer reacting to what they had done. I was deciding exactly when to let them believe they had succeeded, so that when the truth surfaced, it would not just interrupt their plan. It would dismantle it entirely. By the time I left Martin's office, the plan was no longer theoretical. It was documented, signed, and ready to be activated the moment I chose to move. But the real shift did not happen in that office. It happened later that afternoon when I returned to the house unannounced. I did not call ahead. I did not give them time to adjust the narrative. I parked in the driveway just after 3 p.m., the Arizona sun still high, the balloons from the party now half deflated and tangled along the fence. The front door was unlocked. I stepped inside without knocking. Voices carried from the kitchen, Melissa's sharp and controlled, and Daniel's lower defensive. You told me she would just go along with it, Daniel was saying. She will, Melissa replied, her tone clipped. She has to. There is nothing she can do if everything is already in motion. I stepped fully into the doorway then, my presence cutting cleanly through the conversation. That depends on what you think is already in motion, I said. They both turned at once. Daniel froze. Melissa straightened, her expression shifting almost instantly into something composed, but I saw the flicker underneath it. Surprise. Not fear yet, but close. I walked into the room slowly, placing my purse on the counter with deliberate care. I think we should stop pretending this is about keeping things simple, I said. Do you want to explain the trust amendment? Or should I? Daniel's face drained of color. Mom, what are you talking about? He asked, but his voice did not hold. Melissa, on the other hand, recovered faster. I'm not sure where you are getting your information, she said evenly, but I reached into my purse and placed a copy of the document Martin had given me flat on the counter between us. The paper made a soft, final sound as it landed. From here, I said. Silence followed. Not the polite kind. The kind that fills a room so completely that even breathing feels too loud. Daniel stepped closer, his eyes scanning the page, his hands tightening at his sides. What is this? He demanded, looking from me to Melissa. She did not answer immediately. She stared at the document, her expression hardening in a way I had not seen before. It is a draft, she said finally. Nothing has been finalized. A draft, Daniel repeated, his voice rising now. You told me this was just a restructuring for tax purposes. Melissa turned to him, her tone sharpening. It is, she said. That is exactly what it is. I leaned forward slightly, my hands resting on the edge of the counter. Then why does it include a clause that removes me as a beneficiary based on whether I am considered part of the family? I asked. My voice was steady, but it carried. Daniel looked back at the page, his expression shifting from confusion to something much closer to anger. "Melissa," he said, more quietly now, "you said nothing would change for Mom." She exhaled sharply. "Nothing would change if she cooperated," she replied. That was the moment it broke. Not subtly, not gradually. Daniel stepped back, as if the words had physically pushed him. "Cooperated?" he said. "With what?" "Cutting her out. I'm trying to protect this family," Melissa snapped. "You think stability just happens? It has to be managed, structured. If she does not fit into that structure, she is my mother," Daniel cut in, his voice louder now, no longer controlled. The words echoed in the kitchen, sharp and undeniable. I did not move. I did not interrupt. I let the truth land where it needed to. Melissa's composure cracked then, just slightly, enough to reveal the frustration beneath it. "And I am your wife," she said. "And I'm thinking long-term. About Ethan. About what this family needs to look like moving forward." "Look like," Daniel repeated, his disbelief clear now. "You mean what it looks like to other people?" I reached for the document again, sliding it closer to Daniel. "It is more than that," I said. "They have already started building a case. Public. Perception. Consistent language. Structured exclusion." He looked down at the page, then back at me, his voice quieter now, but no less intense. "You knew about this?" he asked. "I found out yesterday," I said, "and I confirmed it this morning." Melissa crossed her arms, her posture defensive now rather than controlled. "Even if that is true," she said, "you cannot stop it without making things worse." I met her gaze directly, holding it without hesitation. "Actually," I said, "that is where you are wrong." I tapped the document once, precisely. "Because the moment you try to move forward with this language, it triggers a full legal review, one you do not control." That was the moment the power shifted. Not emotionally, legally, structurally, undeniably. Melissa's expression changed completely then, the confidence replaced by something tighter, more calculated. Daniel looked between us, the realization settling across his face in real time. "You mean this whole thing can be stopped?" he asked. I straightened, my voice no longer just steady but firm. "It already has been," I said. Silence filled the room again, but this time it was different. Heavier. Final. Melissa did not speak. Daniel did not move. And for the first time since this began, the version of reality they had constructed was no longer holding. But the consequences of that collapse had not even begun to unfold yet. And what happened next would decide whether this family could be rebuilt at all, or whether everything they tried to control would fall apart completely. The silence in the kitchen did not break gently. It shattered. Daniel stepped back another pace, his hand dragging across his face as if he needed to physically wipe away what he had just heard. "You went behind my back," he said, his voice low at first, then rising with each word. "You planned this. You tried to push my own mother out of her own family." Melissa did not flinch this time. She straightened fully, her composure hardening into something colder, more defensive. "I did what needed to be done," she said. "Someone had to think ahead. Someone had to make sure this family did not stay stuck in the past." "The past?" Daniel snapped. "You mean the woman who raised me? The one who helped us buy this house?" His voice cracked at the edge, not weak but breaking through something real. I stood, where I was, not interrupting, not softening what was unfolding. This was no longer mine to carry alone. Melissa's jaw tightened. "That does not give her permanent control," she said. "Things change. People step back. That is how families evolve." Daniel let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "No," he said. "That is how you justify cutting someone out." He turned toward me then, his expression shifting. Not to guilt, not yet, but to something heavier, recognition. "Mom, I did not know it went this far," he said. I met his eyes, steady and clear. "You knew enough," I replied. That landed harder than anything else I had said. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He simply nodded once, slowly, as if accepting something he could not undo. Then he turned back to Melissa, his voice no longer uncertain. "We are done," he said. The word was simple. Final. Melissa blinked, just once, as if she had misheard him. "Daniel, do not be dramatic," she said, her tone sharpening again. "This is a legal adjustment, not—" "No," he cut in louder now. "This is betrayal. You tried to rewrite my family like it was a business deal." She stepped forward, her voice rising to meet his. "I was protecting what matters. By lying," he shot back. "By erasing people, by planning it behind my back." The control she had held all afternoon was gone now, replaced by something rawer, more exposed. "If you cannot see what I was trying to do, I see it perfectly," he said, "and I will not be part of it." He turned then, walking past her toward the hallway. "What are you doing?" she demanded, following him. "Fixing this," he replied. I remained in the kitchen, listening as drawers opened, as a closet door slid back, as the quiet sounds of a decision became action. A few minutes later, Daniel returned, a small suitcase in his hand. He set it down near the front door and looked at Melissa with a clarity that had not been there before. "You need to leave," he said. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Melissa stared at him, her disbelief now unmistakable. "You're throwing me out of my own home," she asked. "This is our home," he said, "and right now, you're not someone I can live with." She laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "You think this will hold up?" she said. "You think you can just undo everything?" He met her gaze without hesitation. "I already called my attorney," he said, "and I will be filing for divorce." That was the moment it ended. Not slowly, not with negotiation, with consequence. Real, immediate, irreversible. Melissa's expression shifted again, but this time there was no recovery, no recalibration. Just the realization that the structure she had built had collapsed in a single afternoon. "You are making a mistake," she said, but the certainty was gone from her voice. Daniel did not respond. He opened the door and stepped aside. For a long moment, she did not move. Then, without another word, she walked past him, her heels striking the floor with sharp, echoing clicks. She picked up her keys from the counter, grabbed her purse, and left. The door closed behind her with a finality that did not invite return. The house fell quiet. Daniel stood there for a moment longer, his shoulders heavy, his breath uneven. Then he turned back toward me, his voice quieter now, stripped of everything except truth. "I should have seen it," he said. I looked at him, not with anger, not with softness, but with something steadier than both. "You see it now," I said. That was enough. I picked up my purse from the counter, adjusting the strap over my shoulder. "I'm going home," I added. He nodded, not stopping me this time. As I walked toward the door, I paused briefly, my hand resting on the frame. The house behind me was still the same. The walls, the furniture, the photographs. But the illusion that had been built inside it was gone. And this time, when I stepped outside, there was nothing left to question, nothing left to prove. Because the place they had tried to remove me from had never been theirs to redefine. And now, they were the ones left standing in the consequences of that mistake.